Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be ripping apart yet another book by the late fraud Dr. Beatrice Sparks. Now, this was based on a blog post I originally published on the 12th of August, 2013, but it was actually like fairly condensed down from reviews I wrote of this like horrible, horrible piece of so-called literature elsewhere. Like, for example, I think I might have originally reviewed it on MySpace. Yeah, I know I am that, although I'm dating myself, and I also reviewed it on Amazon, and I also wrote along on Facebook post about it. So like this was, but I guess like I started writing all these negative posts about it maybe like 10, 13ish years ago or so. This book is so awful. I think this one might actually take the cake as the all-time worst Dr. Sparks book which I have ever read, and that's saying a lot because like her writing was just so absolutely horrible. I should probably start a whole playlist about the videos I have done ripping apart this horrible fraud's books. And it just, has her trademark writing style over it. Just like, oh, so many things. It just makes it obvious this was not the journal of a real teenager. So anyway, Annie's Baby is yet another toxic book written, not edited, by the late fraud Beatrice Sparks. As awful as her books are, I think they would be good required reading for anyone who wants to write YA, especially contemporary or edgy. Each and every book is like a lesson in how not to write YA. Like, seriously, check them out if you don't believe me. They are really, really good, lessons if that's the subgenre of YA you are interested in. So, 14-year-old Annie is as one-dimensional and stereotypical as all of Dr. Sparks's other creations. It's like she wanted us to define these teens by their problems, like, say, Jay the Satanist. That was, if you don't know already, that was the only book of hers which is known to have been originally based on a real teens journal. Alden Barrett was a young man who unfortunately took his own life in the early 1970s, and about 25 of his entries remained in the finished published product, but Dr. Sparks like made up all the rest. It was a bizarre satanic theme that just horrified the people in American Fork, Utah. Totally like really like effed up his family's lives. It was just a horrible, horrible story. And don't worry, I will be getting to that book in a future video. And so anyway, she's wanting us to define all these teens by their problems. So, Jay the Satanist, Alice the Druggie, Nancy dying of AIDS. I will get to it happened to Nancy as well in a future video. Kim with the eating disorder, Sammy the ex-gangbanger. There's no depth in any of her characters. So, Annie meets 16-year-old Danny on the soccer field and immediately thinks they're soulmates with some special, epic, magical love story for all time and eternity. Yes, Sparks was a Mormon, and because I've studied a lot of religions, I recognize distinctively Mormon terminology and concepts she uses in each and every one of her books. Even the supposedly Catholic Nancy's diary is full of Mormon language, and I know this is a little off topic, another book not about this video, but I was just, thinking, oh, there was actually even a discreet, like, subtle, like, Mormon, like, allusion reference in It Happened to Nancy I never thought about before, like, alluding to the goofy behavior around the magical underwear. Like, I hopefully you'll stick around and watch that video. I cannot wait to rip that book apart, although I am also, overdue to read it so I can get, even more, like, angry details ripping that book apart in that video. Oh, and did I mention Annie doesn't even know his name before she decides they're forever soulmates? After only a few dates, she already thinks they've got a serious relationship. It's obvious from the jump that Danny is an abusive scumbag and player, yet Annie makes excuses for it, even after he rapes her at a party. She stages some ridiculous scene to make it look to her mother like she were hit by a car while jogging at night. Like, I mean, seriously, who one goes jogging at night and like who I'm hit by a car and I'm not going to do anything about it. Oh, I'm not going to go to the doctor or the hospital. Oh, it's totally fine, just let it slide. Dr. Sparks was like this in so many of her other books, when her characters like confess to their mommies what's really going on, or even when they lie at first before like admitting like the truth, like the mommykins. She had serious like hardcore mother worship. I ripped that apart in previous videos, but like the mothers are like, oh, let's just handle this privately. You'll snap back. Oh, psychology is for losers. Why would you go to the police or the doctor? We could just like handle this privately at home. And just yet another like proof she was completely out of touch with how like modern people, particularly modern teenagers, like behave. So anyway, like after this scene where she like pretending to mommykins like she was hit by a car while jogging at night, like everyone totally does that. So Annie and Danny get back together and she continues lovingly putting up with his domestic violence and rape. Like, I mean, I realize like domestic violence is a really complicated subject and it's just too simplistic to say, oh, why don't you just leave? Like particularly when you had a chance, your husband or boyfriend or whatever was out of town, or you were broken up for a couple of weeks, or your boyfriend like husband walked out on you or something, or whatever, you were at a party, there were so many chances to escape. But it's so much more like complex than that. Coercive control, psychological duress. Sometimes you have children tying you to the partner, and particularly back in the olden days before no fault divorce, many times the husband would get automatic custody of the children, and the ex-wife would be, left with no money. She would be left holding the bag because she needed to have a husband to, have any money or support herself, like just a roof over her head and things like that. But it's just totally over the top and unrealistic in this book, even like considering, yeah, it can be very, complicated and take a lot longer than many like people outside of such situations realize to, leave a domestic abuser. It's just like, oh, he's hitting me, but it's totally fine. It's like a complete, parody and really actually, making light and really grotesque. She did not understand anything about anything. Like if she wanted to write a serious book about domestic violence, it's sure barking up the wrong tree and like just not depicting it, accurately at all, even within the context of, yeah, it can be very, much more difficult than a lot of people realize to walk out. And I do realize I'm starting to sound like a broken record. And so anyway, then Annie gets birth control pills from a friend, yet there is no description of how this came to be. Wouldn't a real, normal teen journaler record such an important event in detail? And there's no details of just how Danny is hurting her during sex. Is he being rough during the actual act? Pinching her, like squeezing her arms? What? I mean, I'm not saying I'm asking for like graphic sex scenes in a YA book or anything like that. Obviously, of course not. But it's just like, give us a little like hint, like how exactly is he hurting her? You can't just say, oh, and this is another thing. Annie is talking to her journal like it's a real person. I personally also do name my journals. They kind of come to feel, like friends after a long time of being with the journal, but I've never, like Annie's actually talking to them like real people, not just like using the name to like make it feel like a friend. Like, oh, I have something to tell you, Daisy. Lately, Danny has been hurting me a lot during sex. And that's just it. Like, there's no details. And how did she get the birth control pills from a friend? Did the friend go to the doctor? Did the friend already have these pills? Was the friend like going celibate for a while, like becoming a reborn virgin or whatever, or just like deciding not to date until she like found a more serious boyfriend? Oh, I have leftover pills, so you can have them. And just like, you can't just use other women's or girls' birth control pills. You need a prescription for them, and sometimes the kind of pill that works for one female's body won't work for another female's body because like, your body chemistry, or maybe you're like more prone to migraines or something. You just need a lower dose of hormones than some other women and girls can tolerate. But it's just like so many things her teenage characters have no details about that any normal real teenager would write about in more detail in their diary if these things were actually happening to them. Yet more proof that like these were not like real characters at all, and Dr. Sparks was just like making everything up out of her like bizarre, twisted mind. So moron Annie thinks it's so hard to remember to take the pill every day, so of course she gets knocked up. Her mommykins is amazingly loving, forgiving, and accepting, just like all the other parents in Dr. Sparks's books. And this was the scene I believe did also happen with Jenny and with Nancy in those books. So again, she's totally reusing lines and scenes pretty much word for word. Like Annie comes to Mommykins in tears, like, oh, Mommykins, I have something important to tell you. I'm crying. I'm taking Mommy by the hand, and oh, Mommy, this happened to me, and oh, this, and that, and oh, I'm pregnant, and I was with a dude who was abusing me and having, oh no, premarital sex at only 14 years old. And of course, Mommykins lovingly, like, totally forgives her, and like, oh, I'm totally accepting. It's like Dr. Sparks did not seem to understand some particular, this is, I mean, not saying like, it's normal to be antagonistic or anything, but it's just like many teenage girls in particular are known for having difficult relationships with their mothers. They're not like, oh, Mommykins, I have to confess this horrible thing that's been happening to me. And Mommykins immediately forgives. And like, none of these teenage girls in her books ever have realistic relationships with their mothers. They're just like, annoying, obnoxious little goody goodies like in the like Hollywood movies of, like let's say like 30s, 40s and 50s when they call their mothers darling all the time, like every 30 seconds. It's just again, her Molly Mormon worldview is totally coloring how she depicted these characters. Like, let's have some, realistic dynamics and interactions between teens and their parents, even if you're going to pretend it, and particularly if you're going to pretend it's a real teenager's diary. Like, have her being, like fighting with her mother, like not talking to her, like refusing to confess things, like moving out or not being all lovey-dovey and crying and cuddling and kissing together. Like, ew, like that's just so completely not normal and realistic for like a teen, particularly in the modern era. And so anyway, after like Mommykins forgives Annie after her tearful confession, and so she's living in the 1990s, and get ready for this one. She goes to an unwed mother's home. That's not my word for it. That's actually the word Annie and Dr. Sparks are using. Like, seriously, WTF? How many of these still exist, especially under that title? Like, I mean, I can understand maybe she would go to like a halfway house if she were like homeless or something like that. And I do realize there are like so-called, crisis pregnancy centers that are meant to talk women and girls out of getting abortions and like provide, well, in the best case scenario, at least, like, provide them with resources so they can actually like support their babies, not just say, oh, don't get an abortion, but we're not going to help you with anything. You're going to be on your own, like up the creek without a paddle. Some of these crisis pregnancy centers actually do send the single mothers, on their way, or they even keep them in the home with them. I don't know much about this subject, but I do know like some of them have been. I know some women who say they have been good to them. Like, for example, they'll give them groceries, money, help them find a better job, find some nice housing, and like even maybe help pay for the hospital or midwife bills and stuff like that. But anyway, like unwed mother's home, like those do not exist anymore. Those went out the window in the 1970s. Maybe there might have been a few holdovers into the early 80s, but just like how many teenage girls do you know or did you know who discreetly went out of town to like visit an aunt or something, and like, oh, they came back, and they were suddenly talking, I mean, obviously I realize in the 50s and 60s and the early 70s they wouldn't have admitted they had like a what they would have called like a bastard or illegitimate child back then, but it's just like you just don't see that anymore. Like teenage girls who get pregnant and decide to keep the baby, they just don't go out of town to like discreetly give it up for adoption or like have it like secretly be raised by like the aunt and uncle or the parents as a pretended much younger surprise younger sibling or anything like that. It's just like I just can't say enough about how unrealistic this particular part of the book is. It's like she could not mentally get out of the 1950s. And of course, Annie is vehemently anti-abortion and anti-welfare. And again, like, it's not my, battle, whatever. You can believe whatever you want, but like Dr. Sparks did not like accurately depict like medically what happens during an abortion. If you're, like rock on if you personally don't believe in it, that's fine with me. Like your beliefs aren't my beliefs or whatever, but she just like is depicting it in this like you would think in a propaganda video or something from some like fire and brimstone fundamentalist church, instead of like accurate like medical information about what really happens regardless of whether or not she like personally supported it. And the stereotyping of teen moms as welfare queens was so offensive and over the top. My parents were on welfare when I was born, and they were in their 20s. Welfare is a godsend when you don't have any means. Most people on welfare really aren't cheating the system. And again, of course, because she was really, really right-wing and conservative, of course she would be against welfare. Oh, these women are only having so many babies out of wedlock because they just want mommy money and welfare money, and they don't really want to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. And that's totally not like even consider that some people genuinely cannot do the bootstrap thing because people are standing on the boot, or maybe they, God forbid, don't even have any boots to begin with. So just like another indication, these books were all written by an over the hill, like over the top, like ultra conservative, like ultra religious morgue bot pretended therapist. She wasn't even a real therapist. She lied about her training and education and credentials. Annie has her baby at only 7 months. And of course, there are almost no details about her labor experience. Yes, because that's something all new moms neglect to record in their journals. Having a damn baby. The details aren't special or important at all. The description that is given sounds suspiciously like twilight sleep, since she talks about zonking out from some drug she was given. Well, that would fit with the whole unwed mother's home storyline, both straight out of the 1950s. And if you don't know, I realize this is a little bit out of off of topic, but no, twilight sleep was like a very strong drug cocktail. It mixed morphine and scopolamine primarily, and the mothers would be like totally like going raving stark crazy during labor, but they could actually still feel the pain, but they just didn't remember anything, so they have no memory of giving birth, and they had to be like, tied down to the hospital cribs with like lamb's wool so their husbands or themselves wouldn't see, like, oh, what happened? All the skin is rubbed off around my ankles and my wrists, or like they would just like, scream nonstop. It was just a horrible, horrible, abuse of women. And it's a whole generation of women had no memory of giving birth if they birthed in hospitals during this point in time. And so like no responsible doctor, I don't even think any rogues could have gotten away with it in the 1990s, still giving twilight sleep. I mean, seriously, we have modern drugs now, like, epidurals, or in outside of the US they have, gas and air, nitrous oxide, like the woman just like puts the mask over her face and, breathes in as much as she wants whenever she needs a little bit of pain. And I believe there really still aren't nearly enough, like, wide spectrum of options for pain relief drugs. Yeah, I wonder why. If men were the ones giving birth, we would have like way more to choose from than just like, epidurals and like, nitrous oxide, the gas and air, or, like roughing it out, like, totally natural childbirth with no pain relief. But anyway, that's yet another thing that makes it seem like this is a woman who like mentally could not get out of the 1950s, and that was like, transplanting all her memories of that era into the 1990s. So just like yet another, she was a total fraud. Like, she couldn't stop giving unintentional evidence. She was the real author of these books, and these were not real 1990s or early 2000s teenagers. After only about 2 weeks, Annie and her namesake go home from hospital. What? Wouldn't the typical baby born at only 7 months be kept in hospital for much longer these days? It's not the 1930s. I mean, I think even by the 1950s, they were no longer sending women and their babies home from hospital if there was a premature baby. Yeah, 7 months, that's 2 months premature. You need to stay in for like, tests and a little bit of help with breathing. Just like, seriously, I cannot say enough about medical like misinformation in her books, like teenagers not talking like teenagers, social and like cultural landscape not being like it really was in the 1990s. Just so many like things indicating she was not, like writing about actual teenagers. Annie is the most selfish, whiny, negligent mother ever, even trying to ditch Lil Annie out in public because she just can't handle mothering. Sparks really thought all young single moms were crap parents. And again, how common is it these days for a baby to be named after her mother? I realize there are still lots of, mini-me's, like little boys being like juniors after their fathers, or even like Roman numerals. I've seen as high as like, the 8th or the 9th. Like, what is this dude, a king or a pope, that, the namesake has to continue every single generation as, long as time there is? After a visit with her bishop, again with the Mormon language, Annie decides to give her baby to a couple the bishop knows. Because in Sparks's world, no single mom deserves to keep her baby. Adoption is always the answer. She was probably pissed Roe v. Wade effectively put an end to the adoption mills in the baby snatch era, when these young women, like mostly like, white, middle class, suburban women, and mostly in their teenagers, but there were like some in their early 20s too. They were basically like coerced into giving their babies up for adoption. And many times they weren't even like given like pretended or coerced, compelled choice. They were just, oh, your baby was taken away for adoption. You didn't really sign anything or like consent or agree to it, but oh, this is just for the best. Like, go home, pretend this never happened. And if you're come back to this hospital to give birth when the title Mrs. is in front of your name, because, oh, a Mrs. husband's full name deserves so much more respect than a Miss. Like, oh, then we'll treat you with respect. And of course you can keep your baby, but this baby needs to go to a married, proper, suburban, like white and delightsome, like bourgeois couple, instead of like, how dare you try to keep and think you deserve to raise a baby when you're like an unmarried woman and you don't even have the Mrs. in front of your title. The counseling sessions Annie has with her distant relative, Dr. Sparks, were also pure BS. I mean, after a certain point, she started writing herself as a character into these books. Yet she just had such a sky-high ego, like total classic narc. Real people don't express themselves that way. And Sparks clearly didn't know the difference between abusive sexual behavior and consensual BDSM, or at least like within certain parameters. I have, since writing all those reviews, like 10 plus whatever years ago, I have like read more deeply of the second wave feminist critique of BDSM, and I realize like there is still like some disagreements I have with that, but I've come to see it's not nearly as like harmless as I thought it was. Like, I realize this is off topic, but it's just like I just have more, my views on BDSM have evolved over the years, I would say, but I still, don't think there's anything wrong with like, let's say, like an erotic spanking or just like a little rubber whip, as long as you're not, like actually like domestically like violence, drawing blood from your partner. And I realize this is maybe a little bit too much information, but again, just like Dr. Sparks, she didn't know the difference between like even like fairly vanilla like consensual BDSM with safe words and actual like abusive, outright abusive sexual behavior, or like, so even people like claiming like, oh, this is BDSM as an excuse just to like violently abuse women. She just didn't understand anyway. And like, who the hell uses the word sadist to describe someone who sexually abuses his partner anymore? Oh, wait, I'm sure Dr. Fraud was also against BDSM relationships too. And there's one scene I remember in the counseling sessions where like Dr. Fraud uses the word like sadist or sadistic, and oh, Annie, you're looking at me quickly. That means you don't understand what that word means. And of course she goes on her little morgue bot lecture against, oh, this is what this means, and oh, I'm the doctor from like YBU, and even though I never really went there and I'm not a psychologist, but I'm just gonna like pretend to do all this stuff I don't know about. Annie's mom confronted Danny about his paternity, and she immediately backed down when he said he'd get all his buddies to claim they had slept with Annie too. This isn't the 1950s, yet again making it like obvious Dr. Sparks was mentally stuck in that decade. They could have taken him to court and gotten a DNA test. They could have even appeared on Maury, which has been, one of my guilty pleasures since 1999 until it was, canceled or like finally like went off of the air. Was it like a year or so ago? I believe it was fairly recent. So anyway, that would have been such a fun, I realize it wouldn't have happened because, Dr. Sparks, her style, but that would have been such a fun scene if they had been on Maury in the book, and it's like, Danny, when it comes to Lil Annie, you are the father, or Danny, you are not the father, and then Annie does a run of shame off into the green room, and like she's like bawling on the couch backstage. That would have been so fun. I have so many happy memories of watching both Maury and Jerry Springer, and from the age of 19 into my mid-20s. Like I still love watching the old episodes and segments of Springer and Maury on YouTube. It just brings back so many fun memories throughout my lifetime. I didn't believe this were a real journal for one damn moment, let alone written by a teen. Besides the constant Mormon references, I knew it was written by Sparks because of her trademarks, like excessive exclamation points, frequent use of all caps, and way too many italics, including italics in all caps, and with the exclamation points afterwards. The writing style and the author's note and Q&A in the back are exactly like Annie's writing style, right down to the anti-welfare rants, which, again, totally offensive. Yeah, I wonder. Oh, and Annie frequently talks to her journal, Daisy, like it's a real person, even having back and forth conversations with it. Nutty, and like she was like, oh, boo, baby, kit, cat, dat, la, 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 doodle, doodle. Like I mentioned in a previous video, like Dr. Sparks frequently had her characters talking in all these like goofy, like baby made up like baby words and like nonsense syllables. Even a doo-wop song would think was too goofy and embarrassing, and she is like goofy phrases no real teen would say, like, wow, now I know what hormones are, said no 14-year-old ever. Just like with the weird mommykins worship, again, that's not something like teenagers are exactly known for. Even in the Victorian era, that would have seemed kind of like goofy and over the top. Like, seriously, this book was absolutely terrible. I would recommend it to no one unless you would like a great example of how not to write YA. Like as I've mentioned, I only have read Dr. Sparks's books to take one for the team and warn people away from them, and it is kind of like fun and entertaining to write reviews and make videos ripping her apart. She was just, a horrible, horrible fraud. And I hope more and more people continue like realizing and discovering she was not the real author of all these books. And I do recommend the book Unmasked Alice by Rick Emerson, which I also have a previous video of. Like she was way worse than I already knew. Just a horrible, horrible, horrible person. And it was not just about like, oh, I didn't click with her writing style, or the books, like the subject matter isn't my style. It's like she was dangerous, influencing, public policy and other people, and like particularly impressionable teens who thought this crap was real. Just, oh, I hate her so much. Thank you very much for watching all the way to the end. Now, please consider leaving a comment to tell me if you have ever read any of Dr. Sparks's books, or if you've like heard of them or know about her. You have heard anything about like the controversy with, like the books she claimed she wrote, but was actually like proven to be just, I mean, I'm sorry, the books she claimed were real teen journals, but like she was later discovered to be the sole writer of all of them, not just the editor and discoverer. I just like hate her so much. And please consider subscribing if you haven't already. I will see you guys again very soon in my next video. Thank you again for watching. Bye.